welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast Women in Tech Series Special. We have got some of the UK's brightest and most incredible female tech leaders. For the next 4 weeks, we will cover some of the most important topics. We'll also be finding out loads about these inspiring women in the tech sector and just talking about their career, their journey, the hurdles that they faced, and everything else to do with women in tech in the UK right now. So yeah, Karenza, I'm really excited about interviewing Marta Krupinska. She's a true force of nature, super ambitious lady, mentors numerous startups, and has done some incredible things in her career. So I'm really excited about this one, Karenza.
Yeah, and I've heard her interviewed in the past, and what I really love about her style is she just doesn't hold back. You know, she has something.
She's
on
very
her
candid, isn't she?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we tend to sort of see some mega successful people and assume their life has just been kind of paved with gold and they've just done amazingly well and life is just rosy. It very rarely is. And I think with Marta, we'll get someone who will probably unpack a little bit about some of those sort of more rocky times. And I hope she'll be willing to talk a little bit about that.
So without further ado, let's go over to the guest, the head of Google for Startups UK and serial entrepreneur, the brilliant Marta Krupinska. So Marta, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Karenza and I have been so excited about this one. I listened to your exciting new podcast, and you asked a great question to kick off, which is, what got you out of bed this morning? So maybe let's start with that one.
Well, the beautiful sun shining got me out of bed, but I also got myself a fancy new bicycle and committed to riding to Cambridge with a couple of colleagues. And I've really not been cycling very much, and that's 100k or 60 miles. So these days I need to get out of bed in the morning to go for a spin around Victoria Park in East London where I live, because otherwise I will be completely dead about a month from now.
It would be great to start, Marta, by just giving the listeners a little bit of a snapshot of who you are from the early days right up until the present.
So yes, I come from Krakow, Poland, fell into tech and entrepreneurship sort of by accident. I started my first company at 19 with my best friend, sort of with this very naive and cute mission of what if we could organize a trip around the world and find people that would want to do it with us and support that effort. It was the early days of Web 2.0 or user-generated content. It was 2006, so Facebook was really young and not really that present in Central Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, which then sent me to New York for a little while and to London in 2012, where I've been so exactly for 10 years now. And that through my sort of travels and migrant experiences, I always struggled with sending money back home. It was always very expensive to support my mom financially. And so 2012, I met a couple of brilliant guys that had built an offline money transfer before, and together we started Azimo. And Azimo is a global money transfer platform that's done extremely well over the years. I stepped down from that business end of 2017, went traveling for a few months, told myself, Jesus, that was so hard. I don't know if I could ever do this again. I think probably I can't. 3 months later, I co-founded another company, this time giving people access to their salary ahead of payday. I've had 7 co-founders over the years, all of them white men. I sort of started asking myself if there's something wrong with me or with the world, because, you know, I look around and that's not the only people that I see around me, but this is essentially who I end up seeing in business at all times. I was also growing increasingly frustrated with what I saw as the definition of success that was prevalent in the tech industry, and how quite often the ones that were enjoying the biggest financial success were not necessarily the people that created technology solutions or used technology to solve the biggest problems. And Google came along. I've had a good relationship with Google since Azimo because they were actually very helpful to us, especially after we raised Series A. And I joined Google for Startups end of 2018 as head of Google for Startups UK. And it was, let me just say, a very interesting experience. I've only ever worked for myself, and suddenly I had 100,000 colleagues and I was part of the 3rd largest company in the world. Certainly a culture shock. But in that role, my job is to find, support, and scale startups with the help of the best of Google, which we understand as our people, our products, and our best practices, this brings us to today. I was still an active founder and at Google back in 2018. We then sold my last company in 2019. I've since joined two organizations as chair that could not be more different. One, called AquaOcean, designed the world's first liquid hydrogen power autonomous marine drone. And the second organization I chair is called Youth Business International, which is a global charity that's been around for 20 years, actually a spin-off of the Princess Trust. And it helps young people under the age of 35 into entrepreneurship. We're looking at entrepreneurship as a solution to unemployment, but also as a solution to build generational wealth.
It's amazing, Marta. Hearing your journey is so inspiring. And you said earlier on that you were the prevailing definition of success at the time when you were questioning it. What's your definition of success?
Well, I say, for me personally, I think my biggest success is that I haven't become an asshole. I think. I mean, you can ask my friends and family, but there is definitely a huge pull at a certain point to start believing that you are more special than other people. It is amazing, and again, as somebody who doesn't come from much, it is amazing to have enough, not to have to worry, to be able to support my loved ones, and to have some flexibility to, for instance, be able to take some time out, work on a new thing, or in fact invest in other ideas and in other founders. But I think the things that I've appreciated the most, the ability to surround myself with brilliant, smart people that challenge me intellectually, the ability to work with people that I love and trust and look up to. I mean, it's very, very close to that quote that I don't remember exactly how it goes, but the essence of it is find something that you love and figure out a way to be paid for it, and you'll never have to work a day in your life.
Well, it's a wonderful quote. And I think it's a good sort of life philosophy to try to live by, isn't it? And I just wonder what kind of drives you, and what are the best life lessons that you have learned from those that you've looked up to?
I think there is definitely a sense of purpose that I have. And this is probably, my mom is a very virtuous person, probably to a fault. And she'd always tell me these stories of right and wrong. And if I felt that somebody wronged somebody else, I had to come in and intervene. And I definitely feel that I have a sense of responsibility. In 2014, probably, this sort of conversation of women in tech was becoming really, really hot. There was a brief period when I was probably in every newspaper in this country, when Azimo was growing really fast, and it was sort of crowned as one of these most exciting UK startups of the time. And I remember being asked, so what's your advice for other women? And I said something along the lines of, listen, I mean, if I was able to do it, maybe anybody can. And it was quite a naive view that I think came from the fact that, I came here on a Ryanair flight, with 3 coats on my back, so I don't have to buy an extra suitcase. And suddenly, I've co-founded this incredible organization. I had all these opportunities. I saw myself as the underdog, and I was like, oh, if I can do it, then rags to riches, anybody can do it. And then my best friend didn't speak to me for a month. She is an incredible individual. She's a sex worker and an activist. One of the most brilliant, emotionally intelligent, committed people that I'd ever come across. And after a month of me being very confused as to what happened, she told me, I can't believe you said this. You have just erased the experience of so many people with that single comment. Don't you understand that you're cis, straight, white, pretty, well-educated, smart, articulate, able-bodied? Just saying anybody can do it erases so many people's experiences. Don't do that. Don't ever do that again. And now imagine, I think one of the things that I've been really grateful for is that I have a very diverse group of friends who have very different perspectives from me. Most actually don't come from tech or business. If there wasn't someone in my circle to call me out then I wonder where I would be today. So I think there is probably some mix of feeling responsibility that now that I have a little bit of a platform and a little bit of influence, I want to be using it the right way. A genuine belief that we can all in our small ways make positive impact. And also this giving me an absolute kick.
Yeah, and I mean, diversity of thinking is so important as well. And having that perspective from your friend who was, I guess, courageous enough to tackle you about it and to talk to you about it, because there are some people who aren't quite so brave. So I really admire her for having the guts to talk to you about it, because it's incredibly hard to broach that sort of feedback with someone you love and that you think they may have messed up a little bit. But I do think diversity of thinking, and it's why we're having this podcast series in the first place, is trying to think about that diversity of thinking. Do you have a kind of set of principles to ensure that diversity of thinking is there?
I mean, there are simple things that are probably obvious in ways that we can differ from each other. It's gender, it's race, it's class, which again, I had to learn a lot about when I moved here and sort of the nuances. It's the educational background. It's probably a sort of, political views. Over the years, I've really come to enjoy and appreciate having people close to me that have views that are slightly different from my own. And because it starts with forming teams of people that have a different view, but it's sort of like this conversation around diversity and inclusion. One is being in the room and the other one is actually being comfortable to speak up and feeling that you have space in that room to show up. I think it's really about creating psychological safety to be able to have these difficult conversations. And I think in all of my teams, we always have. And it takes different shapes. In my last startup, my co-founder, CEO, and I, we would often have these shouting matches. And the third one would go, "Oh no, mommy and daddy are fighting. Can you please stop?" But actually, it was because we knew each other really well and we knew that nobody had any sort of bad intentions. We'd be able to, at the end of it all, we could hug it out and, move on. And actually, it was really helpful to have the third one. He'd sometimes calm us down. But it's allowing that conflict without feeling that it's dangerous or risky either for anybody personally or for the business.
I just kind of ask you about co-founders. Are there any sort of formula for success, do you think? Do you typically see a more successful leadership team who have got sort of a diverse set of founders, or have you not noticed any patterns at all with this?
So one is patterns that I've noticed. The other one is just the plethora of data that's available out there now. We know for a fact that diverse founding teams produce better financial outcomes, are less capital intensive, just deliver better market outcomes. And a large part of that is, again, going back to that diversity of thought. You will likely be able to attract more diverse talent. You'll be able to foresee different types of challenges or circumstances. If it's B2C, you understand your whole pool of customers better. If it's B2B, you understand possible people you're selling to better. There are only advantages, and they come for sort of a number of reasons. The things that I found, going to go back to trust, to psychological safety, and to values. When you think about business plans will change, market circumstances will change, you will pivot a million times. So you can completely just decide to work together on the basis of having the most unique set of skills for that first version of the product that you're trying to build. But it might actually turn out that 3 years later, you've departed from that product. But one of the things that won't change is, what company culture do you want to have? How do you want to treat your employees? How do you want to show up in the world as an organization? And I found people who are able to have that conversation early on to be much more successful than those that don't have that conversation. And this is when, again, VCs often, one of the things that VCs look at is how well the co-founders know each other. And it's interesting, I know you recently had a conversation with EF, who made a business out of bringing strangers together. So it's very, very possible. But there is also a stat that says 60% of startups fall apart because of people reasons, and often it's co-founders falling out.
And presumably you have to have a shared vision as well, don't you? You have to care about the same things and be able to have that open dialogue.
100%.
You said something recently, Marta, that I think I read, or I may have heard you say it on a podcast. It was something along the lines of only 1% of global GDP that comes from entrepreneurship is from female entrepreneurs, which I was quite shocked by. Can you correct that for me and just give us a bit of context on that as well?
Yes, so the 1% is about the amount of VC money that goes to women founders. So in Europe, last year, 1.1% of all money invested in startups went to all female teams. And then probably about 8 or 9 to mixed male-female, and the rest of it went to all male teams. Now, this is particularly upsetting when you think about the fact that it's actually just not moved over the years. So I probably first started thinking about it and looking at it in about 2014, and it's been pretty much stable. Atomico every year run their flagship State of European Tech report. In 2020, we were all excited because that number jumped to 2.4. I mean, can I just put it out there? It's still pathetic. What are we celebrating? Like 2.4 is a tiny amount, but it was a lift. 2021, boom, came back down to 1.1. And obviously, one could argue we should really look at the funnel. So how many of the founders that start their entrepreneurial journeys are women? Do some of them give up before they even try and raise cash? Or maybe do they build different kinds of businesses and try and bootstrap or get grants or whatnot? Maybe they don't go down that VC route. So I'm not saying that 50% of all startups are started by women and then that gets reduced to 1%, although anecdotally you speak to investors and it's probably somewhere between sort of 25 to 30%, depending on part of the world or part of the country. So it still isn't looking very good. And I think it's hard because on one hand, I operate in this constant state of outrage, but that, as you can imagine, is not the healthiest state. And then on the other, I'm trying not to get used to the fact that this is good enough. So probably as we're increasing diversity on this side of the table, opportunities for women founders are going to be increasing, but I would hope that we will continue putting in a lot of effort and talking about it and shouting about it and changing it, because it's not good enough.
Yeah, because I've heard you allude to this as well in relation to the progress in women in tech seems to be a little bit of a facade. I'm being a bit cynical here, but there's basically a lot of progress in the PR around women in tech, i.e. women on the front of magazines. But when you look under the bonnet, the numbers are still not great, are they? Would you agree with that?
No, completely. And I think one thing is actually reminding ourselves that, yes, maybe we can quote a few more women or recall a few more women founders, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the actual participation and availability of resources for these women to be successful is fair and equitable. And I suppose then there are also more nuanced conversations that we should be having. So I think, again, there's a lot of people now talking about diversity. And just as we think about diversity, for instance, I think I should no longer be diversity. In fact, I think I am not diversity. I'm a well-educated white woman. I don't think we can talk about opportunities for women in tech if we're not thinking about intersectionality. If the only women that get funding are, again, well-educated Western white women, then is that progress, really? And I actually think it's very important that we say that it isn't progress. And I know that there are people who are of the opinion that, we have to start somewhere. Let's get the easier sell first. And I think that's rubbish. It's great that we're discussing this in these rooms, but I think all of us have a responsibility to all of us. And again, I treat my role as an ally to women founders of color quite seriously.
Lots of people we admire have been trying, but why isn't it going faster?
We could talk about the structures and the systems of power. And the extent to which, some organizations or groups are maybe not exactly incentivized to be letting go of a system that is benefiting them. So it sort of starts with not only the people who are affected by the issue speaking up, but actually the people that are benefiting from the system. So for instance, again, if I'm now, I'm in a relatively senior role at Google and I have a little bit of power, one could enjoy that role and just sort of say, okay, that's it, then I'm on the inside, so good for me. And then you could be sort of trying to do something about it. This whole conversation starts from the way that we get socialized, the way that we get educated. One of my favorite TED Talks talks about how we raise our boys to be brave and we raise our girls to be perfect, and how this affects not only the propensity with which young people would go after the so-called riskier endeavors, but also the way that we evaluate what happens when they make mistakes. And actually, a very questionable view I have not expressed yet, or definitely not publicly. And the Theranos verdict, we've all been outraged by all of the terrible things that have happened, and arguably all of the terrible mistakes and misconduct of Elizabeth Holmes. And I'm thinking a little bit, she's not the only one that messed up in Silicon Valley. I mean, have the founders of WeWork or Uber been equally scrutinized? Are we all equally outraged? Hasn't the founder of Uber recently raised another 100 million? So I think there is, it starts from what's considered to be appropriate for different sexes and how we model behaviors, but then in families, in offices, in the public spaces, how we evaluate the actions of people when they mess up or when things don't work out. And on the modeling behavior, the last point that I'd make is Anne-Marie Maffedon, who's the founder of STEMET, incredible leader, maths prodigy, got a PhD from Oxford in math when I think she was like 16 or 17. She said years ago, and I thought it was brilliant, that one of the best things we could do to support women in tech would be to have a character on EastEnders who would be a sexy, smart, successful black female physicist. In like, if we also start modeling that these, that women can be anything, that this becomes aspirational. I mean, I don't know if EastEnders is still the right example. Maybe it has to be a TikTok or Instagram or whatnot. But we socialize everyone with these images, just sort of change the mental models of who we think of when we say successful entrepreneur. And like, do I see Elon Musk, or can I see somebody who looks a little bit more like me?
Absolutely. I think confirmation bias plays a big part in this too. There is one other thing as well that Carenza and I spoke about the other day with Alice from EF, who you referred to earlier on. For anyone who doesn't know that, is Entrepreneur First, Alice Bentink, who was great. And one thing that Alice mentioned was the word ambition. That really resonated with me, and something. I've got 2 daughters, and I do want them to believe they can do anything. I want them to be like you, Marta. You're very driven. You've set up 3 businesses. I mean, I want them to think like that. And you, Carenza, of course. I mean, successful, and to be successful, I want them to believe they can do anything. So my question is there more that can be done to shift paradigms, to make young women more ambitious and feel like they can be CEOs, to feel like they can set companies up, feel like they can be line managers, or whatever they want to do?
Yeah, completely. I need to caveat this with, I am not a parent, and I don't know. I can only imagine the kinds of hopes that everyone would have for their children. I mean, I suppose there is an element where I would kind of hope that one day we're going to get to a place that it would be so absolutely normal for women to hold all positions of power that we wouldn't have to desperately wish for the women to want these things. And the women could have all sorts of choices, everything from I actually don't want to work at all to I want to be the CEO of the world's biggest company. And all of this was completely normal and within reach, in the same way that it would be for men. And I suppose on that front, I also want to sort of say at the same time, I hope it's going to be increasingly acceptable for men to want to be engaged parents, take paternity, take time off from work, talk about mental health, and generally these masculine and feminine traits will become more normalized. And we sort of recognize that all of us, it's a spectrum of behaviors, and we can all use all of them to the extent that feels authentic for us. You said something around, making young women more ambitious. Again, I would want to hope, I think there's almost an assumption that they're not, or maybe we're not. And I guess, I think that's there. I think I will go back to definitions of success. When I was growing up and I was thinking about wanting to be successful, I had a very particular sense of what that is going to entail. And a lot of it is quite sexy. It's, it's flying on planes around the world, meeting people, going to fabulous parties, working 20-hour days. And, and while that was maybe an attractive vision for me, I can imagine that for very many people, it is less attractive because there is not very much room there for personal growth, for exercise, for looking after your health, for family, these things that we also want. And again, let's just say that it just so biologically is that, for instance, in order to have a family, a woman has to make a few more concessions. So I think part of the thing that we can do to help women feel excited about all these things that they can do if they want to, and if we continuously work on making it systemically less difficult for them, is to change the definition of success, is to say that a successful CEO is one that runs an effective organization, but also doesn't work weekends and, goes on holidays a couple of times a year and has a hobby. And I think this conversation is incredibly important, because otherwise, I'm not exactly sure if we continue defining it as continuously jet setting, not having very many friends, and just sitting in boardrooms with old white guys nonstop. I mean, I'm not surprised. That might not be very exciting. So the more successful women we see in business, starting all kinds of businesses. Erica Brodnock comes to mind. She was a successful news anchor. She's a PhD MBA, a mother of 5, and just recently started a business, just raised her first round of funding. The business is called Cami, and it's a B2B platform that supports parents on their journey. You've got incredible health tech founders like, companies like Vine Health or Tune doing really well, supporting people with cancer, with chronic conditions, with supporting women with understanding their hormonal health. You look at people like Louisa from Railsbank, very deep tech, sort of FinTech products. you're looking at all these different people on these different career trajectories, and it's suddenly becoming more appealing because you feel like, okay, I'd like her life. And I think the question is, do I want her job is part of the question of, do I want her life? And the more that life becomes alluring, I think the better the chance we'll want to make the leap.
I think as well, because that goes back to something your friend said to you about actually you can potentially exclude so many people, and those role models who've got amazing lives. I think it's easier in today's digital age for people to almost even inadvertently paint a picture that everything's rosy and it's all been great. And so what I really loved about the way you started your story today is the fact that you talked about the failures that you've gone through. And I think the more of us who are willing to speak openly about the times when we've messed up, the times when we've made mistakes, the fact that we don't all have wonderful, lovely days every single day, and actually you can feel quite gloomy sometimes, things can go wrong. And the more we start sharing a little bit of that, I think there's a new honesty in the conversation, which I think becomes more accessible to more people. And by extension, I'm hoping will lead to more inclusion and more diversity.
Amen.
Youth Business International sound like an amazing organization. What have we got to look forward to from Gen Z going forward?
So yes, Youth Business International or YBI, incredibly powerful organization. As I said earlier, it's been around for about 20 years, and it sort of started with this set of assumptions that in order for a business to succeed or for an entrepreneur to succeed, you need three things, and YBI have turned into their basic principles that they now evangelize around the world. And it's around access to knowledge, both business knowledge, but also soft skills. And I think that the sort of that emphasis of soft skills is actually really, really powerful and sometimes harder to learn than facts and figures. The second piece is around mentorship. And again, if we're thinking about inclusive entrepreneurship, we have to be thinking about communities or homes where there isn't really much by way of being able to look at your mom and dad or your uncle who's done this before. So you really, if you haven't, you can't be what you can't see. So really giving people access to experienced leaders who've done things before, made the mistakes, are able to lend a helpful hand. And the third piece is around access to finance and access to markets, either being able to tap some loans or investment opportunities, but also, or be able to finance your organization from revenues, but then you need to have that access to markets. So YBI has done exceptional work around the world, has members in 50 countries, almost just in COVID, they helped 120,000 entrepreneurs around the world. Off the back of this, protected almost 100,000 jobs. And you then start thinking about the cumulative effects that it had on communities. So I really think that they have a specific, or should I say we now, as I've had the opportunity to join as chair as of last August. And one of the incredible things about YBI is, so I've known them, my co-founder from my last business used to work there. So he told me about them. And then when COVID hit, Google was looking for a partner that they could disseminate large chunks of money around the world to support businesses from shutting down. Google has a philanthropic arm called google.org that deploys large amounts of cash for issues, for causes like this one. So I sort of, through my co-founder, got to YBI, google.org, gave YBI $5 million. I've had the opportunity to see them deliver over a couple of years, and then completely through a different connection, turned out they were looking for a new chair. I sort of had the conversation. My approach to life is, let's say yes and then see what happens. And so the founding chair is Sir Malcolm Williamson, who's 82 years old and was CEO of Standard Chartered and Visa. And to think, again, we're thinking about the changes in leadership, the courage that this organization had to say, there is this incredible human who contributed to this organization becoming what it is, but also let's have the guts to see what happens if we're led by our user, essentially, a young entrepreneur. I wasn't expecting this. I was very surprised and delighted, of course. But I think it speaks to the spirit of the organization, and I'm very excited. We have very ambitious plans for the future, both in terms of the number of people we'll support, in how we're going to support them. I'm hoping to bring a little bit of my tech background and bring more tech companies to be involved, because again, especially you think emerging markets, companies like Stripe or MasterCard, or any of the e-commerce platforms. Just the opportunity is huge as internet becomes more and more ubiquitous, and a lot of these young people will be and are already really excited to use digital tools. So I think the opportunities are endless. And I know, Gareth, you've asked if I'm more optimistic about Gen Z. 100%. I think that there is a confidence. I find Gen Z to be unapologetic, and that lends itself incredibly well to entrepreneurship. I feel like they know who they are and what they want. They're quite clear on what their values are. They're quite principled. I'm hugely excited for what's coming.
Staying on the subject of Youth Business International, and also with the work you're doing with young people with Google, what trends are you seeing with the type of startups that are popping up everywhere? I know there was a big burst of fintech innovation in the last sort of couple of years. I'm seeing more and more biotech and health tech companies pop up. What trends are you seeing, Marta?
So definitely concur with you. So fintech is still going strong, and I suppose obviously crypto and Web3 are all the hype now, but I see more and more people building decentralized apps, and both consumer facing and then the rails to provide these services. So more sort of on the B2B side. Largely probably related to everybody now thinking and talking about the metaverse. Some of the sort of video AR, VR companies are picking up. I still see quite a lot going on in consumer. So you sort of think about companies that are trying to, and both sort of software and retail, but also hardware. So you think about, for instance, a company called Nothing. They're one of the portfolio companies of GV, Google Ventures. You think about how Apple really won the market with this sort of single product approach and attitude, and sort of creating a fan base around a product. So Nothing have done exactly that, starting with headphones, doing really, really well. I feel very passionate about climate and climate tech, and I see so much opportunity in that space. Everything from carbon removals, so not just avoiding emissions, but actually actively taking carbon out of the atmosphere through nature-based or industrial methods. You've got hydrogen, you've got fusion and fission, you've got scalable and sustainable supply chains or alternative plastics. All of this is really, really interesting and really important, and increasingly investors are finding that there's a lot of money to be made there, as well as it's the right thing to do. And obviously, Gareth, you mentioned health tech. Lots of movement in health tech, largely still driven by sort of, remote telecare that we had in COVID. But an area that I'm particularly excited about and is gaining more prominence is women's health startups. We actually recently ran a program at Google for startups for women's health startups, and companies like Serona Health building solutions for women with endometriosis. We've got companies that are looking at anything from pregnancy to finding and helping with STDs to period products. These are very much huge commercial opportunities.
Thank you so much, Marta. You've given us so much value there. I wanted to finish on this one. I know you're doing some really cool stuff with Google and the startup side of things. I also hear you may have a podcast waiting in the wings to start soon. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, what you're most excited about, and a little bit about the journey of setting up a podcast?
Brilliant. Thank you. Yes. So what am I working on? So some of as I said, at Google, a lot of what we do is running programs for founders. And one that we did last year that is probably the jewel in the crown of all the work that we've done as a team was the Black Founders Fund. We invested in 30 European Black-led startups, 20 of which are in the UK. We deployed $2 million in cash. It was 6 months ago. Since then, the companies have raised more than 63 million in follow-on investment, increased their revenues, created a bunch of jobs. So clearly, it's a fantastic community to invest in, often overlooked by investors, unfortunately, although clearly they're picking up the pace. So we're working really, really hard on hopefully, and nothing's confirmed yet, but being able to do this again. In a couple of months, we're also celebrating 10 years of Google for Startups. Globally, it actually all started here in London. The UK tech scene has changed so much. So we're working with Tech Nation, one of our most loved partners, to understand all the ways in which the ecosystem and the scene has changed over the past 10 years and the different ways in which we were able to show up and support. But also one of the projects that I'm very excited about is Scale Ups and Downs. And Scale Ups and Downs is our new podcast. The extended trailer is already available on Apple, Spotify, whatever your platform of choice. And it's been born out of our favorite format that we use with founders called Founder Stand-Ups. In every program, we would encourage founders either first thing on a Monday or on a Friday to come together for an hour and to go around the room and talk about a high, a low, and a biggest challenge. And that often comes from the fact that A, it's lonely at the top, B, you're falling prey to the urgent. It's sometimes quite hard to think for a second, like, okay, what is this thing that's keeping me up at night? And what would happen? What if I could say it out loud and other people could think it through with me? Some of these challenges are universal, and sometimes just a diverse perspective from another human being could be helpful. So that's exactly what Scale Ups and Downs is. We are asking founders to submit challenge that they're grappling with. The way to do this, we're asking everyone to do it. You go to scaleupsanddowns.com, submit your business challenge. It can be founder at any stage of their development and any issue ranging from product innovation to fundraising to people challenges to tech stack or scalability issues. Every 2 weeks, we invite 2 experts to join me on the panel, and we real-time workshop the challenge. Think of it as agony aunt for founders. So we should have our first few episodes out in the next few weeks. So stay tuned. And again, go to scaleupsanddowns.com if you're a founder and you would like to have your challenge discussed openly. And one last thing I'd say here, some founders say, oh, but why would I want to, admit that I have an issue? And actually, and I've been doing this for a while now, the more you talk to investors, for instance, not that investors have all the answers, but we all sort of care what they say. Most investors will say, I already know you're going to have an issue, like long sales cycles, personnel troubles. These are universal challenges. Everybody is going to have them. So I don't expect you not to have a problem. I expect you to recognize that you do, own up to it, and come up with the best possible plan to do something about it. So I actually think, again, going back to modeling behaviors, the level of vulnerability and asking questions is often something that's going to differentiate a really strong leader who'll continue learning as fast as the organization deserves them and requires them to, from somebody who's just going to be limited to what they already know.
Wonderful.
Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday is a great book, and it talks about what you just said there. But look, Marta, I have enjoyed this conversation profusely. I'm sure Carenza has too.
Oh, it's been amazing. Yeah, really amazing. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you so much. It's been great. And really, it's a huge fan of your podcast, a huge fan of Transfer Tech. And I think it's so important we have these conversations to move the needle.
Once again, thank you so much, Marta. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.